Name. Whoops, you can put your name in the chat and just let us know you're here. Say hello. Okay, so tonight we're going to be making crispy polenta cakes with caramelized onions, and we'll also have root vegetables on this that are roasted in the oven and some fresh local farm greens. And just if you're just joining us, this is a workshop to make crispy polenta cakes. Just Roots uses all local ingredients when we source these kits, and we're going to go through really quick what we might want to have out and ready. This is kind of a jam-packed recipe, so I'm going to just get right to it. My name is Brooke. I use she, her. If you have questions, you can just pop them in the chat and Renee will answer them. She'll also write in the amounts of things that I'm saying, just in case, so you can double check there. And we ask folks to keep your mics muted. Hi, Peggy. Keep your mics muted unless you have a question or a comment or something to share, just because the noise of the kitchen can create a lot of feedback. So, okay, without further ado, let's get started. So in terms of equipment, the things that I'm going to have first for pots and pans and such, a sheet pan or something to roast vegetables. If you don't have a sheet pan, a cast iron pan, or really anything that you can put in the oven for roasting our vegetables. I'm also using just a regular pot with a lid for the polenta. And then some kind of, you don't have to have a lid for this one, but we're going to caramelize the onions in a pan, so you're going to want something like that. I like using non-stick, but it's not necessary. Then we're going to get like a big bowl or something to mix all of our vegetables and toss them in olive oil. I like to have a spatula handy and a whisk for the polenta, some knives for processing the vegetables, a peeler, maybe some measuring spoons and cups. I think we only need a 1 cup measuring cup, and we'll also be using a liquid measuring cup. I'll get to that in a second. If you have a lemon squeezer, or you can just use your hand, whatever works for you, that's helpful. Cutting board, of course. And then to the more exciting parts, our vegetables. So we've got a big, beautiful butternut squash. I didn't have, well, I do have a couple, so I can bring those out, but you can use daikon radish, which are often in our CSAs, winter radish, or those beautiful little red round salad radishes. We're going to be roasting those. We had some beets in our kit, some onion. I think you had 3 small or 2 big. We mixed it up for different people. A lemon, which is for the salad dressing. Some butter. I have to use non-dairy, so that's why mine looks different. You also had some lettuce of some sort and goat cheese in your kit. This is delicious, and I'm excited everyone gets to use it. And then I just brought these out because the recipe we use says use whatever spices you like. So some things that I thought might go nice with this dish, and they're not necessary, but you could use them, are Italian seasoning, which is just basil, oregano, and thyme. Smoked paprika. I got some more thyme. I use some chili flakes, like Calabrian chili flakes. Some black pepper, of course, which you will use, and then salt. You're also going to want to use some olive oil. That's for roasting the vegetables, in addition to the butter. Okay, so let's get started. The first thing I would like to do just to get it going is I'm going to start preheating my oven at 425 degrees, and that's for roasting the veggies. So that's our first step. Now we're going to start the polenta because that's the process that takes the most time. So go ahead and use your saucepan that has a lid. We're going to put it on high heat with 1 cup of milk. I'm using oat milk. You don't have to use dairy milk. And 2 cups of water. So get that milk and water boiling. 1 cup of milk, 2 cups of water. Just pour those in together. And we're also going to add some salt to that. So you can use your teaspoon measurements or whatever it is you have. We're going to do a half teaspoon of salt. Where did I put my salt? There it is. So a half teaspoon is going directly in with the milk and water mixture. And I like to close the lid just so it heats up a little bit faster. So I've got this on high heat and I want it to come to a boil, and then we're going to put in our polenta. The recipe we're using for this ratio, it's 3 cups of liquid, so 2 water, 1 milk to 1 cup of polenta. This polenta is amazing. It's locally ground flour, and in New York State, or well, I guess they have flours and they have polenta. If you haven't used it before, it's quite a treat. So I'm just measuring out 1 cup exactly, making sure it's rounded to the top. For that for later. So the process that we're using right now is we're just making polenta, regular polenta. And then because when polenta is refrigerated or cools, it fits the mold of whatever container you put it in. So if you put it in a bowl like this, you would have a circular, wonderful little polenta cake. If you put it in a square dish, then you'd have a square cake. And for this amount, depending on how thick you want your polenta to be, I mean, this is a perfect size if you're doing squares. Once we put it in the fridge, we're gonna kind of smear it over the entire container, and then later we're gonna come through and cut it into squares or circles or whatever you want to do. Play around with it, have fun. This is a good size. And just think about when you're spreading over 1 cup of this polenta, you're going to want it to be, a decent amount of thick. You don't want like super thin polenta. So this size seems to work for me. And polenta making is easy, but it is involved. So we're going to be doing a lot of whisking and a lot of remembering to keep whisking. That's so that the polenta doesn't kind of cake and stick to the bottom and harden. So it's really important that we're vigilant and we're continuing to whisk throughout this process. So I can hear that my milk and water mixture is coming up to temp. I'm not going to do anything until I get that polenta in and get this process started. I'm just getting set up, make a little room for myself here to be chopping vegetables and peeling. I always grab a like compost bucket or bowl or something to put all my veggie scraps in. And as I mentioned before, also a bowl that we're going to put the veggies in to toss with olive oil, salt, and pepper before sticking them in the oven. For folks who joined late, just so you know, we're starting off by set preheating our oven, and that's going to be preheated to 425. That's for roasting our vegetables. We also have 1 cup of milk, 2 cups of water, and a half teaspoon on boil. We put it on high heat, and we're about to add 1 cup of polenta to that. Whisks are helpful at this time. Sometimes I even like to whisk to make sure the milk is incorporated with the water and that the salt is dissolving. I'm gonna have a little sip of water myself. So folks, if we don't get through, well, I will get through everything because I pre-made some polenta so I could show you the frying process. But it may take a little bit longer for your polenta to cool because it's going to take about 30 to 35 minutes to cook. And then we also are going to have to cool it for 10 or 15 minutes, and then you cut it up and fry it. So I already have a cooled polenta in the fridge ready to go, so I can demonstrate that if it's a little bit past 6. I'm just almost there. If folks want to, you can go ahead and give your beets a wash. You can also start peeling them as you wait for your water milk mixture to come to a boil. You can also start removing some of the skin from the squash. One thing I'm going to say is that I personally will not use this whole squash in one sitting. I think I'll use half for soup and half tonight. It depends on the size squash you got. You're more than welcome to roast it all, but if you don't think you'll eat it in one sitting, then you can save it for later, or roast it and then save it for later. Almost there. So I kind of first fell in love with polenta cakes when I worked at a vegan restaurant as a cook. And we used to serve the cakes with, instead of caramelized onions, pickled red ones. That's another variation you could try out. You could quick pickle those onions if you don't want a sweeter caramelized onion. But I think they're delicious caramelized. So basically what we're going to do is drop in our polenta, let it come back to a boil. It might happen very rapidly. Continuously stir for, about a minute. And then we're going to lower it to the lowest possible heat on your stove setting. The lowest possible heat. We want it to cook low and slow so that the polenta grains, the corn, has time to absorb the water. Okay, so I'm seeing boiling action, so I'm going to go ahead and put mine in, and I'm going to continuously whisk as I do it. This really does a lot for maximizing the amount of polenta you're actually going to eat, and that's not going to stick to the bottom of your surface. If you've whisked well the whole time, maintained it, you're not going to lose much of that polenta. But don't be sad if it does stick to the bottom. Sometimes you can't get it just right. So now it's coming back up to a boiling temp. It should in a second. I'm going to continuously whisk a little bit. And then once you know it's at that boiling, I can see it rolling. I'm going to lower it all the way as low as I can on my stove. You can keep whisking. And so if you have an electric stove like I do, it's going to stay warm quite a bit longer. So I'm not going to cover it yet. I'm going to wait until I know that some of that heat from the stove has dissipated. And just keep stirring. And it doesn't mean we have to be stirring the whole time, but we just want to keep that in mind. That is something we want to come back to. I'm going to grab some other radishes so I can demo those that were in your kit. I'm sure you've seen black radishes. If you're in our CSA program before, you can use those. You can use daikon. You can use these beautiful salad radishes too, whatever you want. And I'm just going to keep in mind that I want to keep getting that polenta off the bottom and let it cool down a tiny bit before I cover it. Okay, so we can start prepping the radishes. With tiny radishes like these salad radishes, I suggest just cutting them in half to roast them. That's about the size chunks that we're going to want for the salad. These are another thing you could pickle, like onions, if you wanted to try that out. And we'll go for similar size chunks with everything else, just because we want it to all cook cohesively. Whoops. Okay, mine is cool enough that I'm going to cover it. I trust it's on low enough heat. Give it one more stir, and I'm just going to come back to that time and time again. In the meantime, If you have older storage radishes, sometimes a good trick is just to to peel the skin, because sometimes the skin is the part that's gotten wilty, not the whole radish. So sometimes I just take off the areas where the skin is a little bit wilty, or you can leave it on. But that's just a suggestion for freshening up some of those storage crop radishes that have been sitting in storage for months and months. And aren't we all looking forward to the freshness of spring and summer vegetables? So I'm just using my knife to sort of glide along. You could also use a peeler. And we're going to do the same process. If you don't have a vegetable peeler, you can do what I just did with that radish to your beets. And again, you don't have to peel them. The skin has a lot of fiber and nutrition. You could also just give them a good scrub down in the sink, cut off some of their root hairs, and have them with the skin on. So we are just prepping our vegetables. I like to just start off by sort of slicing into chunks. Now, one of the trickier things about using butternut squash is just getting it opened in half in the first place. It's a very strong, hard vegetable. So having a nice sharp knife or a heavy weighted knife is really helpful in my experience. All right, getting those radishes in nice chunks. Roasted radish has quite a bitter flavor, so just expect that. I think it's absolutely delicious, especially when it has some salt and butter or salt and olive oil on it. But it might not be a kid's favorite. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try. But I think it pairs really well with the sweetness of the squash and the beets. You can add anything you'd like spice-wise to these roasted vegetables. Just keep that in mind. When I'm processing my winter squash, I like to cut off the ends first, like that. And you can either, if you're going to use the whole thing, I guess I'll just demonstrate this now. You can use a knife to peel it. A vegetable peeler is going to be a little bit tricky, but you can certainly use it. I think I really just like using a knife to get that skin off. I'm just sliding down the squash. And the reason I cut the end off is so that I had a nice flat surface to work with. You don't want the squash wobbling everywhere. That's my oven. We got a new oven and it makes a lot of noise when it's preheated. So that's just telling me that it's ready for my vegetables. It goes even more when the timer's on. And so folks, in a minute, we're gonna check on our polenta. And at that point, we can set a timer for 25 to 30 minutes. I think setting it for 25 is probably smart, just to do a little initial check. Every polenta takes different kinds of polenta made from different kinds of corn take a longer or shorter time to cook. Alternatively, if you would like to, you can also just cut your squash in half and roast it with the skin on in the oven. There's no problem with doing that. I'm probably only going to do this part of the squash, to be honest. But you could do that, rub some olive oil, salt, and pepper on it, and you can just scoop it out and cut it later. I think, removing the skin could be a bit more challenging, so I'm just going to cut mine into some nice cubes.
Hey, Brooke, Peggy is asking on the chat, how can we tell when the polenta is ready to go into the fridge?
When the polenta is ready to go in the fridge? Oh, it'll be based on it. We'll get to that point. But it'll be about 30 to 35 minutes in total of cooking time. It's gonna look really creamy. All of the water, milk will be absorbed. And yeah, it's basically time is your best friend with that. But you'll see everything is absorbed. The grains have gotten nice and fat. It's not hard if you taste it. Yeah. And we'll be able to do that together. Okay, so I've got my polenta nice and stirred, making sure to get anything from the bottom. We're gonna keep it at that very low heat, and let's set a timer. I'm gonna set it for 25 minutes. Oops. And I'm gonna keep it covered, by the way. We finish with our squash. So I'm just sectioning my squash into pieces, cutting it into cubes. The squash cooks a little bit faster than beets, so you can leave it a little bit larger. And again, feel free to use the whole thing or do what I'm doing. I only use a little bit of it. I just know that we won't eat that much of it tonight, and that's a big squash. Okay. Next up are beets. Again, peel or don't peel. Do cut the root ends off. Those guys. And go. I'm going to do a quick peel. I like to use a peeler for this. A lot softer than the squash, but your hands might turn a little bit pink, which is kind of fun. One more. So I hope that if it's your first time trying polenta cakes, it's kind of an exciting new world to get into. Having them with like braised short ribs is delicious. Pasta sauces, you can really explore a bunch of different ways to use polenta cakes. And that, that was what I was most excited about sharing, and that we have this locally ground northeastern polenta. Pretty neat. Okay. All peeled, and I'm going to do the same thing. Cube it up. Then we're going to put in a couple tablespoons of olive oil, salt and pepper to taste, and whatever herbs you would like. You don't have to add any if you don't want to. I love the smell of beets. They're so earthy. So what I like to do is get them on a flat end, just time saving. And I stack them. Just be extra careful when you do that. Okay, toss them in. Basically what we're making is like a salad with roasted root vegetables, and then we've got this delicious creamy polenta cake on top with our caramelized onions. And it's not super vital that everything is cut the exact same. However, you'll have some pieces that'll be overdone and maybe some underdone if they're not rather similar. Okay. And this is a good time after we rinse our hands from the beets. It's going to be a great time to stir. Okay. At some point, also, Peggy, just a little note is that at some point it's gonna get so thick it's just too difficult to stir with a whisk. That's also a good time to know your polenta's ready. Okay. So I gave it a good stir. You should do yours too if you haven't already. Excellent. I'm gonna switch out my cutting board so I don't turn my onions pink, even though I wouldn't mind that. All right. So our next step with these roasted root vegetables is to add a couple tablespoons of olive oil. So 2 should be good, but depending on how many vegetables you ended up chopping up, you may want to do more, like 3 or something. Just want to get them totally lathered and coated in that olive oil so they have a potential to crisp. Then we're going to do some salt. I'm going to do about a ½ teaspoon of salt, maybe a little bit more for me. Do whatever's more comfortable for you. I'm going to do a ¼ teaspoon of pepper. And then this is a good time to throw in some other spices if you want. Roasted red pepper flakes, Italian seasoning, garlic powder, because there's no garlic in the dish. Thyme, rosemary. Rosemary and beets is, I think, the most beautiful combination I've ever tasted. Give some thyme. Give that a great stir. I just want to get everything evenly coated. If you have the ability to set a second timer on your stove, you can also do that for your vegetables, or just keep an eye on them. They are cooking at a relatively high heat, so you don't want them to burn, but I think they need quite a bit of time. The smaller you chop them, the faster they'll be ready, of course, so keep that in mind too. And I'm going to lay them out across my baking sheet. All right, and then I'm going to use that wooden spoon to spread them out as much as possible. The key for crunchy vegetables is to not have them on top of each other. These vegetables have a lot of water. They're mostly made up of water. So we basically, if we're crowding them too much, we're steaming them. So that's my key for like really crunchy vegetables or crunchy potatoes specifically. So make sure that's even, and we're going to stick it in the oven. I put it on the rack closest to the heat source, and then we are going to leave those in there for quite some time, probably about 30 to 40 minutes. All right, I'll give everybody just a second to do a little more stirring because it never hurts. And the stirring really helps us have like a nicely coagulated, creamy polenta. All right, we're moving fast. You're doing fantastic. Pause us if you have questions, you can ask. And if not, we'll start with our onions in a second. Okay. So if you weren't here when we first started the class, I'm just going to use a nonstick pan, but you can use whatever kind of pan you want to cook these onions. Caramelizing onions is a little bit of a slow process, and this is kind of a kick-started version of that. And we're going to use just some onions and some butter. You can use some salt, especially if you have unsalted butter. So mine has salt in it already. And we're gonna basically just cut these onions up pretty thinly. You can do as much onion as you'd like. I think caramelized onion stores really well, and it's delicious on sandwiches, pizzas, on top of meats, or really any dish that likes onion. And we're also going to use some water, so about a ½ cup of water. So I'm going to use the same measuring cup I had out. But we'll start off by peeling our onion. My goal is always to make the smallest possible mess when I peel onions and garlic. It's just kind of like a race or a quest I have with myself. Peel as evenly as possible. I'm just gonna make a couple of horizontal cuts. And then we're gonna do pretty thin slices. Notice that I'm not going, well, maybe I did a little bit, but I'm not going all the way to the end. But you could if you'd like to. At the end, I'm just gonna chop the other side off. This works really well when you're dicing. And I'm gonna do 2 large onions. You can do 3 small onions. This recipe is for 3 small onions. Okay, so those are nice and sliced. On the other one. At the end. You can also go this way. And we'll do that once more. If you're a step ahead of me, you can go ahead and take a couple tablespoons of butter, 2 to 3, and go ahead and melt those on a pan, on your pan that you've selected. I'm gonna cut that. Again, nothing has to be perfect, but you want them to cook evenly. The more even your slices, the better it'll be. I'm just reaching over into my compost so I can drop my skins in there. They're very tough skin. Slice these nice and thin, not razor thin, but more half. So onions too are made up of a large part of water, so it may look like an enormous pile, but after it's cooked for quite some time, it's gonna be a lot less onion and you'll wish there was more. Okay. Excellent. You can use those onion skins and any of your veggie scraps to make vegetable broth. We've got a really good online workshop, a great recipe for making vegetarian broth from scrap on our YouTube channel where this recording is, or will be when we're finished with it. So make sure to check that out. Next step, I'm gonna get a few tablespoons of butter. Now, if your onions start to burn or brown, you should add more butter. But 2 should be good. You get that on medium, high heat so that butter melts. And in the meantime, we're coming back to starting. Polenta is starting to look really good. I'd say it has like 10 or so minutes left. And we can use the same pan or a different pan when we fry. Just keep that in mind that we do have to fry our polenta up. Okay, excellent. waiting for that butter to melt. In the meantime, I'm going to fill up 1/2 cup of water that's going to go into our caramelized onions. First, we're going to heat them. We're going to pretty much get them to the point of being translucent. So like five minutes or so. Then we'll add water and salt. We'll reduce the heat to medium low, and we're going to let that water cook off until it's fully evaporated. We'll check my measurements there. That was way more than 1/2 cup. There we are. Okay. I'm just going to get myself a little clean before we move on to the next steps. We're doing great on time. Everyone's doing fabulous. Folks, I always forget to say this during class, but this is important to us. If you have any ideas, suggestions of a workshop that you would like to see happen here in this Zoom space with Just Roots, please fill out. We'll send you a form on email after the class asking for an evaluation or suggestions for another workshop. Just keep in mind that we do try to source almost all of our ingredients locally, so we might not get to the recipe that you requested, but it's still in our mind for summer. Like if you requested something with eggplant, we've got to wait until the summer months to do that. Same with tomatoes for the most part. But your suggestions mean a lot to us. Even if you want to learn something specific, like, butchering a whole chicken or something like that, we'd love to go through those. Or maybe you want more vegan recipes or Indian recipes, whatever it is, we'll learn it and we'd love to demonstrate it and walk through it with you. All right, so my butter is totally melted. I'm going to go ahead and add in the onions. And I don't know if you guys saw this, but I missed the pan with quite a few of them. So 1 second. Okay. All right, now I'm just gonna sort of stir it around to make sure that all of the onions have a nice coating of butter on them. And I know it's a lot. It probably looks like a lot in your pan right now, but those are gonna cook down. And I've got mine pretty much on high heat for now. I'll keep a good eye on it and keep stirring it. But we really want those to start to break down before we add the water and the salt. Don't let me forget the salt. And our vegetables in the oven lit right. At some point, maybe in 15 or so minutes, we're gonna probably right before class is out, we'll probably give those a little toss just to make sure they're being evenly cooked. And I'm gonna stir again. So the polenta is definitely starting to have more of a like viscous, creamy texture. That's really good news. And folks, just so you know, if you don't want cakes and you just want to eat polenta, if you're more interested in that for just a pile of polenta with your roasted vegetables on it, that's fine too. You can totally do that. It'll be just as delicious. That covered. And take my time. Okay. So I've still got about 7 minutes on the earlier side for that polenta. And we've got our onions starting to cook down. now we're just gonna make a super, like the easiest ever salad dressing with a little bit of lemon juice, salt and pepper, and some olive oil. And you can certainly add some spices, black pepper, whatever you'd like in it. The salad dressing is not the like centerpiece of this meal by any means, so it's just a nice simple one. So to make that dressing, we're going to start by cutting our lemon in half. Half of this lemon you can use for garnish or just save for another occasion, and the other half you can juice and use whatever you can to juice that. So I'm just making little lemon garnishes for later. Let's put those on the plate if you'd like. Can you see me? Lemon. And then I'm going to squeeze the other half. Quite a bit of lemon, so we're not going to use any vinegar in this. And you don't need very much salad dressing, so it's kind of, the salad's going to have warm roasted root vegetables and warm polenta on it. It doesn't need to be too wet. Okay. So I did the juice of 1/2 of a lemon. And then I'm going to do a couple, probably just 1 tablespoon of olive oil. That's what the recipe says anyways. Some salt to taste. And some pepper. And you know, my favorite herb to add into salad dressings, well, is tarragon, but that's not going to go with this dish. But is also oregano, so I might just throw a little bit of that in there if you'd like. You can also put in some raw garlic if you have that at home. Some mustard, whatever you want to do to spruce it up. We're keeping it quite simple. Okay. And we'll toss that in a big bowl in a little bit. Coming back to my onions. Starting to cook down in this butter. Looking good. Got them on high heat. Okay. In the sake of time, I'm going to pull out the polenta that I've already made and refrigerated with this exact same recipe. And we'll cut it into pieces and we can fry that. We've still got about 15 minutes left, so we're doing great on time, but it'll be perfect. Okay, so just like I said, polenta just tends to take the shape. It already started curving on its own. It just likes to take the shape of whatever container it's put in, which is pretty cool. And you can use whatever knife you have and cut them into whatever size squares you like. And you just slide a knife down it. Cuts pretty easy. I usually do 2 cuts and 2 cuts, or in 1 cut, sorry, for this size. And then sometimes it helps to have a spatula or something to lift them out. But this is exactly what I want. I'm going to hold it up to the camera so you can see. Its thickness is about the width of my pointer finger, maybe a little bit bigger. It's holds shape quite nicely. Oh, and I dropped it, but that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to set that to the side just so folks can see. Well, up here, and I'm going to check on everything I've got going over here. Give my onions a stir. And those are getting pretty close to the stage that we can add salt and water. I'm also going to stir my polenta. So it's getting very creamy. Just a couple more minutes on that. Okay, next I'm going to get a cast iron pan, but really any pan works. That's just what I've got. And I'm gonna lay down some butter on that pan, maybe a tablespoon or two, and start to fry these. So I'm gonna grab that. I'm gonna turn the heat to medium high. And while all of this is happening, you're balancing so much. Good job, everybody. You can get some salad greens out. You can, it's up to you if you want to toss the salad first in the dressing and then plate it. That would be my suggestion. You could always just drizzle the dressing on top if you want to use fewer dishes. Whatever's clever. I do a little tossing myself. You can use whatever, if you repeat this recipe, use whatever greens you'd like. Okay. I'm probably gonna use them all. I'm a big fan of greens in the winter. And you can pour your dressing over that. It's just a really light dressing. Give it a little stir with some tongs. Just making sure you can see me. That was perfect. Perfect amount for one container. Gorgeous. Ready for what I need to plate. And again, we're going back to check on everybody. My onions are starting to get more of a tan color than white. That's good. They're getting a little more translucent. I'm going to add in about a half teaspoon of salt. You can really just do a pinch if you'd like. Stir that in, especially because today I've missed the pan more than I've made it in. And I'm going to show you what these look like right now. I don't think that they're ready yet for adding water. So I'm going to keep them going on that high heat because there's a lot of them in there. I've got my pan heating up and I'm going to use 2 more tablespoons of our butter. If you're doing them in batches, you can't fit a lot on the pan or whatever. You can just use 1 tablespoon at a time and then add more. Maybe I'll do that too. You just want to make sure there's enough butter to coat the pan. You can hear the butter sizzling. Put that around, and it melts evenly. Now, folks, I'm doing this step right now just to make sure that everyone has time to see this and what it looks like. But I would wait to do this until like right before you're ready to serve. This frying the polenta cakes part, just because it'll taste better, like nice and fresh and crispy. But I just want to show you. Maybe I'll just show you with 1 or so. So okay, I've dropped that one twice now. Here's another beautiful one. So I'm going to take these and drop them right there on the oil, leaving it at medium high heat. We're going to cook those for 3 to 5 minutes on either side. So flipping after 3 or so minutes, we want to see some browning happening. So I'm really just going to let it be until 3 minutes is up, almost as if you're cooking a piece of meat or something. And as always, good time to check on everything. All right, my polenta looks perfect to me. I'm going to hold it up. It's a little bit hot, but I want you to see what it looks like. Nice and creamy. Has some viscosity, but not too much. Not too much that I can't spread it in the pan. Okay. You can also taste it. The grits are going to be a little bit chewier So we're gonna cook them once more and it's gonna sit for a while. So there's the polenta. I'm gonna try to knock it all off of my little whisk there, and we're gonna get out a pan and maybe use a spatula if you can, or some sort to like smooth it out into that pan. So this is the process. We're getting ready. Put it into the fridge. Okay. I'm just gonna scrape it out. So you notice you may have a tiny bit sticking to your bowl. That's kind of inevitable. This is honestly the best I've ever seen it. Not too sticky. So that means you did a good job of stirring. Get all of that loveliness. And it's also good if your pan doesn't sit evenly on your stove to move your oil or butter around. Okay. So now I'm just kind of gonna, it's even hard already, it wants to mold. It's even a little bit tricky to spread it without a spatula. So I'm gonna try to get it as even as possible. It likes to clump into the middle, so spread that middle out. Just think about, you want to make 6 or 8 even cakes. Kind of like spreading cake batter. Okay. I like to do that and then scrape it back in. That's how it should look. And then goes in the fridge for like 10-15 minutes till it's fully cooled. If you were adding any kind of other cheese like Parmesan or something like that, I would highly suggest you could mix that in when your polenta's finished. That's a super common thing to do. I just want to show you what we got. We've got some slight browning. That's perfect. It's time to add our water. For the onions, half cup. We already added our salt. Gonna mix that in and we're gonna turn it to low heat. So basically we're just gonna cook it slow and wait for that water to evaporate. Okay. And it's actually, we can do medium, mine's on medium low, and that'll be fine. And now it's time to flip. You're gonna have some nice, beautiful browning on your cakes. Now, you might see that the edge gets like a nice crisp. It's hard to see on the camera. Brown on it. That's what we want. I'm gonna switch mine to the front burner so it's a little closer to me. So yeah, we're looking for that crispiness. And you can always add a little more butter if you need to for this frying process. You could also sub for olive oil if you don't want to use more butter. Okay, excellent. So this goat cheese is a really soft goat cheese. And if you open it, you'll see what I'm talking about. It's beautiful. It's almost like cream cheese. I think kind of a really cute way to do this would be to sort of take little dollops of it and push it onto your salad like this. You can use your measuring spoons. I feel like the half teaspoon is the perfect amount for the salad. So in the plating, I take a pinch of salad, sort of like a bed. few beautiful scoops of the goat cheese. And then we'll add our roasted root vegetables. A little lemon polenta cake with the onions on top. Now is a great time to go ahead and give your root vegetables a stir. They've been in there a little bit of time and they're starting to get nice and crispy. Oh, they look great. I'm going to pull them out and show you what we've got so far. Got some nice browning on some of the edges. So I'm going to go ahead and stir these up. Leave them in for about 10 more minutes. Again, don't forget you want them to be spread out. Fabulous. Okay, we're doing great. So if you don't have a pan large enough, you can certainly do this in batches, the polenta cake. You're looking for a nice golden color on the top and the bottom before you serve them. Starting to look really tasty. And don't forget, you can always add more butter. Pretty amazing how the polenta likes to stay in its form. Really beautiful. Okay, so I know we're pretty much at time. We have a couple minutes. If anyone has questions, I just want to go through, please, you can unmute yourself and interrupt me if you have a question, but I want to go through the plating of this dish. So I'm just going to have my lettuce, a little wedge of lemon you can put on top, some of the fresh chevre, the goat cheese. I'll put down a piece of polenta with some roasted root vegetables and the caramelized onions on top. Now, the onions aren't, you could caramelize onions for days and days and days and just do it slowly and keep adding more water. These aren't going to be that fancy. We're just going to stop as soon as the water runs out. And that's when they're going to be plenty sweet and delicious. And finally over here to look at the chat and see so many messages. Nice. Okay, that was you, Renee. Got it. I love the chat happening. Okay, folks, if you have questions, now is a great time to do it before we lose everybody off Zoom. I'm so excited to eat this. I hope everyone enjoys and gets to play with different ways of making the same recipe. As I said, my favorite version of it ever was a bed of lettuce with polenta cakes and pickled onions and sauteed mushrooms. And it was just so good. Yeah, milk makes it so creamy. And then, I mean, there are definitely recipes, Jen, where they add milk, Parmesan cheese, and butter, which is how probably it's an amazing way to eat polenta. This is a nice light version of polenta compared to how it could be eaten. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for all this lovely feedback, everybody. Okay, well, we'll see you next time. Keep an eye out for invitations to our next cooking workshop. We haven't planned it yet. We're excited. So if you're really excited about an idea, you can email me or Renee. Both of our emails are just our names, Brooke, BROOKE @justroots.org, or Renee, IRENE @justroots.org. We're so glad you all got to join us. We hope you have a wonderful evening and enjoy your dinner. Good to see you guys. Good to see you.